Hello, my name is Dieter Loosemore and welcome to Win Some Loosemore. Today I wanted to talk about a category of games that seems to be having some kind of, I'm not sure resurgence is even the right word, because I don't think it was ever as popular or thought about as it is right now. If you're watching this as it happens, we are in the midst of a global pandemic. Lots of places starting to come out of some kind of lockdown, but it has meant that we've had to change how we've played games, how we viewed games. And a category that seems to have been on the rise in this time, for obvious practical reasons, has been solo games. Now, I don't necessarily consider myself a solo gamer as such, so my exposure and experience to strictly solo games is relatively limited. Next week, in fact, I'll put out a video talking you through my top 5 solo games, but that'll be a mixture of solo only and solo mode games. But a solo mode in and of itself is something that I've had my eye out for when I do my research for games that I want to buy, I want to play, is does it come with a solo mode? Can I play it on my own? Excuse me. So I just wanted to use this time really to talk about kind of solo games as a whole, if it's a new idea to you or something you haven't thought about trying, but then look at why I play solo games, what I'm looking for from a solo game. Now, typically what I'll be talking about is either how the game involves just one person, and then kind of how the game is achieved, or won, if you like. And for each, I think there's a couple of categories. So the first one, which I didn't state very well, what I mean is the game a game that you could play with lots of people or not, and really all you're doing is trying to beat your score. So every time you play, you're just doing it a little bit better. So free cell and solitaire and such things on the computer, which I've done a lot of growing up, or just simple card games in your hand. They either you finish it, and therefore the only way to compare how well you've won is what score that you get. Now, this isn't an inherently good or bad thing. This is just one of the main categories, is what's your final score, and can you beat that next time? That's the only real progression in that. And then the other one is a clearly defined win condition. You only succeed at this game, not when the game's over, but when you have achieved this thing, whatever it might be. And generally speaking, not always, and I'll give some examples as we go along of times where this isn't necessarily true, but typically for me, who's someone who's more used to competitive play, there is something about achieving something. In competitive play, it's beating the other person. Now, it might be via points, but there's something about achieving something, a goal, a win condition of some kind, that is more satisfactory to me. Now, this is not always the case, and that comes down to how the game plays in the next category I mentioned of how it involves you. What is it you are doing? How is the game functioning as a solo experience? And again, either that seems to fall into you are playing against the game itself, or you are playing against AI, a fake opponent, somebody that you are manipulating a couple of things based on some rules either that the game presents or some components give you to activate an opponent. Some of them straddle the line between the two. And again, typically, if you've seen us talking about two-player games, I don't often like dummy players. I don't like having to think about my own stuff and thinking about an additional person that isn't there just to try and give me a semblance of playing against somebody else. I'd probably just go find somebody else to play with. And so I tend to like more the games where I am playing the game, if that makes sense, and that they typically more often fall into the win condition category anyway. So take a lot of cooperative games that you can play as a solo game. So let's say the pandemic games, just for sheer irony. Your job is to find the cures to these 4 viruses that are populating the world and spreading as you go. That's a clear win condition, and I am playing it to win against that, and it's the game that fights back against me. I turn over cards to see when new outbreaks happen. That is the game playing against me, as opposed to let's say the solo mode of something like Scythe or Wingspan, the Automata factory working with Stonemaier Games, where you have a deck of cards essentially that you flip, and it tells you, okay, you do your turn, whatever you like, and then you flip the card, and that's what your opponent is doing, and you do that. And again, that could be for a win condition like Scythe, where you get the stars and then see who wins based on points, or something like Wingspan, to use that other example, where we just complete the game and then see what scores we've got, and so it's whoever scored higher, and I'm just trying to beat my score as I go. So those are kind of the 4 elements that I'm going to be talking about within what I'm looking for, what I enjoy. I'll give some examples as we go of games I do like in these. And as I say, my general Axis crossover, if they were, I don't know, a grid, would typically be beating the game with a win condition. That would be my typical favorite way to play. But in fact, the example that I gave, Pandemic, isn't a good example for me, because that falls into one of the ways that designers do that I don't like. Now, officially, it doesn't have a solo mode. There are rules for that elsewhere. Sometimes people just do it for fun. I think they've included it later, and different editions approach it differently. But what most people say, and what a lot of games ask you to do, is basically play a 2-player game on your own. And so I will have control of this character, this player, and this one, and they've got to take turns. And so I'm focusing on achieving this one, and then I've got to focus on achieving this one, and doing the cooperation. And it tends to be cooperative games that play like this. Well, really can only be, otherwise we'll come to that in a minute. And I don't like that, for the same reason of operating an AI, having to split my attention. Yes, there's some tactical fun to be had there, but having to manage 2 hands, or in some games even 3 hands, it asks you to play 3 different things just to complete a solo experience, when it also allows you to play 2-player where you only have 2 things going on. So that confuses me, not ideal for me. And then on the other opposite spectrum, the just beating the score each time is just a bit naff. Like, that's more of a pastime. There are games I enjoy. Spiralopolis, I did a playthrough recently. That's exactly all it is. You've got your 15 cards. 3 of the 18 cards are scoring objectives, and then you just play the cards in a way to try and score that. That's fine, because that's a 5-10 minute game. That's just an exercise. That's like playing solitaire on the computer. That's just a time passer. I'm not going into that for a full experience of what games can be, and the kind of strategic depth that those things provide. If I want that, I will typically go for something else, something a bit richer, something a bit deeper. So why do I play solo games? I suppose that, just in a very confused and muddled way, kind of frames my thinking a bit. So why do I play solo games? Sometimes it's exactly that. I just want to pass some time. Here's a game with very little setup. Setup is an important element in this idea. I feel like playing a game. I'm not going to get the satisfaction, and personally for me it's a greater satisfaction playing against somebody else or with somebody else. So is it worth the setup and tear down to do whatever this experience might be? Something like Spiralopolis, I've literally got to pull out the cards and I'm ready. That is the setup. I shuffle, I deal 3, good, now I play, that's it, and then I count scores. Yeah, that's worth it. So that kind of just passing the time thing might be it. Now, having just ranted about why I won't play Pandemic solo because I'm handling 2 hands, games that I love like Keyforge, I will sit and play both sides of the table, but that's because I enjoy the meta game. That's not a solo gaming. That's me exploring the decks and how they've constructed it and how all the mechanics work. That's me enjoying a different layer of it. Now that might be something you do. I wouldn't do that with Yu-Gi-Oh! That I've got a few decks of, or other similar games. I wouldn't do that because that meta game isn't there. That whole concept of the structure of the very things that you're doing isn't there, so it doesn't interest me. I'd rather just play against somebody else, see who's constructed a better deck. So time passing, it's about how long it's going to take versus how long it's going to take to set up and take down. If I want a deeper experience, I'm then drawn to a couple of different things. Really, I'm looking for narrative. That would be why I would sit down and read a book. That would be why I'd sit down and watch a film. So that's going to be why I sit down and play a game. So something like the Lord of the Rings The Living Card game, or nowadays Marvel Champions, or Arkham Horror, the card game. That's to go through a narrative, and they might be self-enclosed like Champions, or they might tell a sprawling vast story like Arkham Horror or Lord of the Rings that kind of is somewhere in between the two and comes in little chapters that kind of string together but don't really matter, whether you play them discreetly or not. That gives me that sense of I get to sit down and unfold a narrative. I get to discover things. Seventh Continent does this brilliantly. I just get to sit down and see what happens. That's fun for me. That's one of the reasons I would play a game, and that's one of the types of solo games that I enjoy, because it's, as I say, slightly equivalent to watching an episode of TV or reading a bit of a book or whatever. But honestly, my main reason for playing solo games is when a multiplayer game comes with a solo mode and I'm learning the game. It will more often be that if it's got a solo mode, that's how I'll teach myself the game. I recently did this with Underwater Cities and Empires of the North and such things. I'll set up the game and, read through the rules and then go, okay, let's stagger my way through it. It's not dependent upon me being good or bad at this game yet. I just want to get a feel for how it works so I'm able to teach other people and enjoy the game a bit more. Because if you've got 4 or 5 people sat around a table, none of them having a clue, it's really hard for a medium to heavy game to really enjoy that first play. So at least if 1 or 2 of us are familiar with it. And so I use the solo play to do this. Now that does mean I probably only play those games a couple of times as a solo game. As say, Scythe is in my top 3 games. And I've played it solo 3 or 4 times at most. Because now that I know the game and love playing the game with lots of people, if I come back and do the solo, it's a bit of work. So I've got to do that AI, I've got to flip the cards. It's not tricky, it's not a huge amount of work, but it's just not as satisfying. That's not what I wanted out of it. I will go for a smaller solo experience like Sprawlopolis, like McKee, like that if I'm going for a smaller, or something like Lord of the Rings or Seventh Continent if I want that big narrative. Those are the main things. If I just want to sit down and play a game, that's what I'll do. If I'm learning a game, that's how I'll do that, is generally through a solo mode. There are many other reasons. There's many other games. I say I'll put up a list next time of games that I love that I like playing on my own. What are your thoughts? Stick them down in the comments. I hope mine have made sense at all. I even had notes in front of me and it's been more rambly than usual. So thank you for bearing with me. If you want to find out what we're up to, you can subscribe to this channel, hit the bell icon so you stay updated when we put out new stuff, and follow us on social media. Just search Win Some Loosemore on the usual platforms and you will find us. I'll see you again next time. I've been Dieter for Win Some Loosemore. Goodbye.